Bring in the panel now to talk about my interview with Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard, who still is on the terrorist watch list. Nina Easton, columnist for Fortune magazine. And Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief for The Hill. By the way, Steve, he was non-committal about the whole is he a terrorist thing.
You asked him directly, do you think Steve is a terrorist?
Yeah. And you didn't even see him in the hallway.
I don't know the specifics of the situation.
What did you take out?
I'm not a terrorist.
I want to know why you're on the list.
I took a trip to Turkey, that's what we think. I took a one-way trip to Turkey in July, and Turkey's the main transit point for people going into Syria, going in and coming out of Syria. So,
note to self.
Yeah.
Don't go to Istanbul.
Don't go there.
Way. Okay. Take away from the interview.
Well, I think the most interesting thing that he said was that he contradicted directly, and I thought rather forcefully, the line from the White House about core al-Qaeda. I mean, you heard Josh Earnest, as you pointed out, on Wednesday say core al-Qaeda is decimated and destroyed, in effect saying they don't really exist anymore. And you asked Secretary Johnson, he said his comment was, it is definitely not gone. It is still present in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and he listed it as a threat to the United States, a threat to the homeland, in his speech on Wednesday. So there seems to be, at least a certain extent to which the White House and Homeland Security and other agencies aren't on the same page about what exactly the threat is, and when you're trying to reassure people that you're ahead of it, and that's what this campaign in Syria is all about right now, that doesn't do the job.
Interesting, this back and forth about the 4 Middle Eastern men apprehended on the border September 10th. He didn't think that they were still detained, and then he got a note that they were.
Yeah. He seemed uncomfortable with that question. I also thought he was uncomfortable about the whole labeling, the administration's labeling of the beheading in Oklahoma as workplace violence. And
he said it's a concern.
Yeah, he said it's a concern. And the other thing I thought was interesting is the decision from the administration not to stop flights between the U.S. and Liberia. And I think that's one they're going to have to revisit, especially if we see more cases.
I mean, they talked about it at the White House today, and people kept on questioning. And, you know, it's not out there to believe that you could shut down flights at least for some time.
Yes, and I know that it's obviously going to affect the economy of Liberia, but you have more cases here, and it affects airlines. We've seen that with stocks this week. They've been hit because of this Ebola scare. So I just think that's one where everyday Americans are like, why aren't we doing that? And as you mentioned, Britain is.
Yeah. Your takeaway from the interview, I want to ask you about Panetta too, but...
Takeaway from the interview, just listening to him, I thought it was interesting. There's sort of two baskets of dangers here. There's the soft targets, which he didn't talk a lot about, but, you know, the lone wolf beheading. We saw the beheading attack or plot we saw in Afghanistan, in Australia. But the other thing that came clear from him was this transit points at airports are still key. So when you look at the Ebola threat, when you look at the potential of jihadists, American jihadists coming back home, and I still want to know if there's a clear list of whether of names. Steve's hopefully not on that of jihadists.
Well, apparently the FBI director is going to tell 60 Minutes that he has a list.
He has a clear list.
He's checking it twice of all these people who potentially are coming to the U.S. or are here.
And then you have, as he put it, you know, Khorasan was actually, you know, he said it was potentially operational, that threat. It wasn't just in the planning stage. So you've got these, again, American airport hubs are still a clear part of national security.
All right, to the other big story from the White House, the Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense, former CIA Director, Leon Panetta, with really kind of stinging words in this book.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually saw Panetta in a private setting a few months ago as all the ISIS stuff was playing out, and he was furious, and so I wasn't really surprised when this book came out. And it's interesting, I think if there was a Fox News book club on the foreign policy of the Obama administration, you would start with two books. You would start with Robert Gates, Republican, and you would start with Leon Panetta, a Democrat, both serious statesman figures, both sort of the grown-ups of the administration, and you have Leon Panetta saying, look, I voiced this. It wasn't like he held this view to himself. I voiced it. We should have put in the effort to keep troops there, that this could become a safe haven for terrorists, if not. Like actually saying that to the president. And then you have Robert Gates saying that the president didn't have his heart into the Afghan surge, that all he wanted was to get out. So on both fronts, you have a president that just wanted to get out at any cost. And I think the pairing of them is fascinating.
Yeah, it's striking.
It really is, and of course, we can't forget that Leon Panetta was also CIA director. He was Secretary of Defense, but he was also CIA director. And I think brings even more authority to his comments on this threat, on the threat from Iraq and Syria. But it's interesting. I mean, I think what you've seen in Leon Panetta and Bob Gates in particular is people who are regarded as sort of above it all. You called them statesmen. They're not. I mean, Leon Panetta can be a partisan, but they're seen as sort of above politics, wanting to serve the country. Barack Obama has been an ideological president, a deeply ideological president, I think made these decisions in sort of his ideological cocoon, and that's what these guys are objecting to.